The grave of Paul, the slab that's on top of it, there are these holes in it, and they would put a handkerchief on a string and they would lower it down so it could contact the bones, and then they'd pull it up, and then you'd have the martyr's holiness would be there. Now that sounds so ridiculously superstitious.
It does, yeah.
But you know who it doesn't sound superstitious to? All Christians prior to the Enlightenment. This is actually not only the biblical worldview, but the church historical worldview until the Enlightenment pulled the holy and the sort of de-enchanted the world.
But is this the worldview of everyone at the time too?
Yes. The bones of the saints were the absolute most important thing a kingdom could have.
Okay, so today we're going back into time. And we're going back to the early church, Luke. And we're taking Bryan Litfin with us, who's the expert on all things early church. And you're a professor at Liberty University. Yep. You were at Moody. You're also an author. Mm-hmm. Thank you for coming into the basement today. I think it's a conversation we've been having since the beginning of, okay, the early church believed these things, and then we kind of skewed over here into an alternate timeline. And now we're coming back, and people are interested in the blurry stuff. So welcome to the podcast. Thank you for, being willing to go on the blurry ride, because it gets weird here. So what are your thoughts on Bigfoot? We're going to start there and then move into...
Okay, I have to confess, I don't get the whole Bigfoot thing.
You don't?
So I would need to be brought up to speed. And I'll say the reason is because, like, the Nephilim, are they hairy? Like, what's the deal with hairy people? That's not really a biblical concept that I know of. Is it?
Oh, there was one hairy guy, at least.
There's some hairy guys.
Yeah, but
Esau
he was good.
Hairy. Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's not a Bigfoot. He's not in the woods. Like, so it doesn't fit my biblical categories.
You can't call people bald in the Bible. That's not a good thing.
Right.
You can't do that.
You can cut your beard off. That was supposed to be shameful. We all got beards here, so
Samson's a hairy story.
Yeah, so you get the hairy people, but they just don't match up. It doesn't
something magical about that hair, though.
Yeah, hair's magical.
And Paul cuts his hair famously.
I just don't understand it's just I don't get it. I think it's probably like feral Appalachian people or something.
I think most professors at Liberty know a lot about Bigfoot. I think it's a common, don't you?
Apparently, I haven't run into those people yet. So
no, but I mean, we started talking about that, and we never, in our wildest dreams, thought that we'd be interviewing professors and theologians,
learned doctors.
Yeah,
and Dr. Litfin, the reason we got connected is we had Kathy Lee Gifford in studio. Her book, Nero, and Paul, you wrote with her. You also wrote Herod and Mary, which is here on the set. Yeah. And we got super interested talking to Kathy about you and your work, as you're a New Testament guy. Yeah. And you really, as Nate said, you talk a lot about the early church, the apostles.
As I hit the mic stand.
It's cash here. It's all good.
It is. The apostles, you wrote a book called After Acts, which talks about what happens to the apostles after Acts. You're an expert on the early church and early church fathers. And this is stuff that we have kind of talked about in platitudes, but not really drilled down specifically. Yeah. And we talked pre-roll about Dr. Michael Heiser, about a lot of the overlap between the supernatural, the unseen realm, and what not only the apostles, but also the early church fathers, how they operated in that same sort of mindset or paradigm. And I thought today I'd like to start with what happens to the apostles. And this is such a fascinating thing. This is a conversation that I had with Dr. Joel Muddamalle as we were talking about some of your work. It was, we know that the apostles continue on after the death of Jesus. We know about the martyring, but what kind of happens? We lose track of them at some point to what the rest of the story. Right. And I think there's where do they go? Yeah. I mean, there's a crazy tradition, and there's archaeology around what happened to Peter, Paul, Thomas, and others, and really about the spiritual world and what the early church was navigating. So where do we want to start with this? Because this is such a fascinating conversation, because it's, in a lot of ways, our show likes to try to fill in some of the stories that we don't get, right? The Bible doesn't give us a lot of Genesis 6. We get 4 verses, right? The Bible doesn't give us a lot of perhaps what happens pre-flood outside of what it does give us. And a lot of in that case, a lot of Second Temple literature fills in some of that. But in this case, there's a lot of early church fathers and a lot of more contemporary literature of that Hellenistic time that gives answers.
I love it.
Right?
No, I love it. Thank you for having me on. And let me just say that I'm fairly new to the Heiser conversation, but the more I get into it, the more I realize that it kind of needs to be extended into the ancient church. Like it's so far, it's kind of a biblical conversation. I mean, he started it with, much more the Old Testament. That's who he is, the Hebrew, the A&E world, ancient Near East. And then, Dr. Joel and kind of New Testament and Pauline backgrounds, and it's all there. But the more I'm kind of becoming up to speed on the unseen realm, the more I'm seeing how much of that is actually part of the ancient church, the church fathers, like 500 years into and frankly, it goes right into the Middle Ages too. I mean, like a Thomas Aquinas is talking about angels all the time. Yeah. It's the Reformation and the Enlightenment where that unseen realm just disappears.
Yeah.
Especially the Enlightenment, I think. I mean, maybe not the Reformation. Luther understood the devil very profoundly, but the Enlightenment just killed our awareness of that. So all that to say, I'm so glad that we're having this conversation, because I do think in addition to it being an Old Testament conversation, an intertestamental conversation, a New Testament conversation, it's also a patristic or church fathers conversation. And I'd love to be part of that. But we can talk about what happened to Peter. Maybe people are fascinated with that because, you got the Vatican and the popes and all of that, like what happened to Peter?
Right, because I actually was in Rome last year.
Oh, you were?
I went to the Vatican.
Okay.
And my dad has sent me the book, The Fisherman's Tomb, beforehand.
I know that book.
Did you go down into the crypt?
No, at that point, there wasn't tours the day we were there, but we got to
down there. It's kind of crazy.
So there's like two levels. Like there's the more common level, but then there's the special permission from the excavation. Yeah. Did you go down to where you could see the first century tombs?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the third level. And you see these tombs that are it was an open street. So should we set this up? Should we talk about Peter?
Yes. Let's start with Peter.
Okay. So like you went to Rome. So whoever's been to Rome, you picture it, St. Peter's Square, there's the Vatican, there's this big obelisk that's in the middle. If you're looking straight at the doorway of the front of St. Peter's Basilica, you have to imagine that it's a little off center, because to the left of it, there used to be, in the day of Peter, there was a huge circus, which is a racetrack. So it was chariot racing. I mean, we talk about Nero today.
Yeah.
Nero just absolutely thought he was like God's gift to chariot racing. So it was the Circus of Nero and Caligula. And it, like I say, it was sort of over to the left. And the obelisk that's in the middle of St. Peter's Square was once on the spine of that circus. So they brought it from Egypt. It's Egyptian. And the chariots would race around it. Now, and obelisks are dedicated to the sun.
Yeah.
The sun god Ra. So chariots are also part of sun worship, solar worship. And of course, Jesus is the bridegroom and the Gibor in Psalm 19, the Gibborim, the champions who rejoice to run their course and ride in a chariot. So Jesus has this solar imagery. But anyway, at the Vatican, Peter, by all the evidence that we can see, was martyred in that circus, along with a bunch of other Christians.
In Nero's circus.
And Tacitus talks about this, where Christians were rounded up and for entertainment. And of course, Nero thinks he's Mr. Charioteer, so he's there, riding around in the garb of a charioteer. But they did two things to the Christians. They would either set them on fire, wrap them in these garments that had like flammable pitch in it, and burn them. So they call it Nero's torches. So they would burn when night fell, they were lit to slow burn as torches for this event. And all the elite, Romans are there. But the other thing they did is, and this is very blurry, is they would, they put some of those Christians in like skins of prey animals, like mammals that would be like a deer or something. Yeah. And then they let loose these super fierce dogs. So there's this kind of animal prey. And so they were inside the fur, and the dogs would like hunt them down and eat them.
An animal. Jeez.
But probably Peter was one of the ones that was burned. And so even the scripture speaks about this, where it talk, stretch out your hands, and another, Jesus says, and another will lead you where you do not want to go. And that stretch out the hands is a reference to crucifixion. And so,
do they really have his bones there, or no?
Okay, should we get to that topic?
Well, let's get to how he's killed. So he's we're getting there. So
he was crucified upside down.
Well, yeah, like I was going to ask about that, because that's what you hear.
So the evidence is pretty good from like this. A lot of what I'm talking about comes from a 2nd century text called the Acts of Peter. Now it's full of a lot of story and folklore, but it does record that he was crucified upside down. Not, as is later said about him, because he was unworthy of being crucified like Jesus, but he gives this kind of like Gnostic speech about the inversion of the cosmos. So there's these things that get added into texts like Acts of Peter that maybe is a little sketchy. But anyway, he's upside down, and then they take his body. So here's the circus over here. There's a street, and then there's a necropolis, which is what you went down and toured, which is the city of the dead. So there were tombs, and they put his body in a grave next to the circus of Nero. And so eventually that circus falls into disrepair and it becomes ruins. And the Christians of the second century said, well, we don't want to lose this spot. Like he was dumped in this grave. We know where it is, but the next generation might forget. So we want to build what's called a trophy. And we could get into what trophies are. We think of trophies as like, a little cup you would have, like, look, I won the state championship. But originally a trophy was a Roman and Greek where you would pile up the armor of your defeated enemy. You would almost make like a little effigy of a defeated man. You'd put you'd hang a spear and put a little breastplate and a little helmet.
Like a scarecrow, kind of?
Yeah, it would be like a scarecrow, but it was victory.
Okay.
But it was like a little, and you'd pile the armor and like, look, the enemy, we've despoiled the enemy. Look, here's he's just a scarecrow now. And then the Romans kind of took it and made it something more monumental. But the trophy was a victory monument.
From the beginning of Blurry Creatures, I remember we talked to Dr. Michael Heiser, and he said, God has a family. Family is important. And I think all the stories we've heard over the years really help us understand why that's true and why human life is actually very precious, way more than we ever expected it to be.
Today, a woman facing an unexpected pregnancy can order an abortion pill online, often before anyone has a chance to tell her she's loved, that she's not alone, there's hope, and that baby's life matters. And that's why we need you right now. At preborn network clinics, mothers are welcomed with compassion, practical support, and a free ultrasound. And when she sees her baby and hears that tiny heartbeat for the first time, fear often gives way to hope.
People need answers in times of crisis, and preborn partners with pregnancy clinics across the country. And when you're in that crisis, it's always helpful to hear from people who can help you.
In fact, more than 80% of abortion-vulnerable women choose life after seeing their baby on an ultrasound at Preborn Network Clinic. That one moment can save a baby's life and open a mother's heart to the hope of the gospel in Jesus Christ. So this is our moment right now to stand for those who cannot speak for themselves. For just $28, you can sponsor an ultrasound through Preborn and help expectant parents see the hope for a future. And maybe you're a business owner. Maybe you can give more. You want to consider a larger gift, $1,000, $2,000, or $10,000 to claim a write-off, or a $15,000 donation sponsors an ultrasound machine for a clinic, helping impact countless lives for years to come. That's one heck of a legacy. To donate, dial pound 250 and say baby. That's pound 250 baby, or give securely at preborn.com/blurry. That's preborn.com/blurry. Together, the Blurryverse can save lives, just one heartbeat at a time.
So Peter gets a little trophy, and they built a little thing with like a little canopy and little pillars over that grave. The one grave that was important to the Christians had a marker. And by the late 2nd century, there's a deacon in Rome, and he's trying to say why Rome's an important city. And he says, if you want to know where the graves of the apostles are, you can go out to the Vatican field, and out there is a trophy of Peter. And you can go on the Ostian Way, south of the city, and you can see the trophy of Paul. So the trophies were these markers. And in the 20th century, so the question about the bones, in the 20th century, in kind of the World War II era, they started digging around underground, under the floor of the Vatican. So like say you're walking down the main nave of St. Peter's Basilica. Am I talking too much?
No,
you're not
talking enough.
I got a quick question, Brian, though. So
okay.
Was Peter get, just to recap for me, I know that they burned Christians and they hunted Christians.
Yeah.
Was Peter, in your mind, he was crucified upside down at the Circus of Nero?
I think there's good evidence of that because it's in the 2nd century.
Okay.
So I think that was probably an eyewitness remembrance. But in the story, he requests it. I doubt that it's something they said, sure, we'll accommodate you, horrible criminal.
Right.
If you want to give a message, go ahead. So it's probably, it's well attested that you were crucified in all kinds of positions.
Do we know how Peter ended up in Rome? Is that part of the...
Yeah. I mean, in 1 Peter, he says the church in Babylon greets you, and Babylon is code for Rome.
Okay.
So he's probably there. There's good evidence that Mark's gospel is written there, and Mark's gospel has this kind of Latin-based, he explains terms. And certainly there's traditions, very, very early traditions that he came in the time of like Claudius.
So if we get to, so you fast forward to the 20th century, and then is this lost then kind of to time?
Not to the Catholics.
So you have this trophy, right?
Yeah. No, this is not lost.
But it's not famous.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's lost to time until the 20th century. Like nobody.
Sometimes the trophy falls down and everybody kind of...
It actually didn't fall down. It just got buried in the sands of time. So what happens is, I got to the 20th century too quickly. It's a ruin. And there's a trophy. Constantine comes to power. We should talk about Constantine.
Sure.
He's very blurry, but we'll do that later. But Constantine comes to power, and this is such a Heiser kind of thing, because he has adopted Jesus as his cosmic warrior lord in place of Hercules and other gods. But anyway, Constantine says, I want to honor this God that I have taken, this Jesus that I've taken as my God. And so he builds the first St. Peter's Basilica. And he mows down the necropolis that's there. And the obelisk is still there. It's just sticking up out of the ground of the ruined
circus. So they built it on a graveyard almost.
They did, because the grave is the grave of Peter. They built it over Peter's grave.
Yeah.
So like Michelangelo, so later Michelangelo rebuilds it. I'm doing too many layers here, but later in the Renaissance period, the current St. Peter's goes up. Yep. Not the Constantine old St. Peter's, but the new one. Yeah. And Michelangelo's dome, that's the famous thing, is directly over the papal altar, which is directly over the grave of Peter.
Wow. You can
it's just a straight line.
You can see it from inside.
You have a glass
chapel.
thing, and you can kind of peek down in there.
Yeah, it's wild. So, I mean, obviously, I think a lot of people think that these things just become famous instantly, but over time, they kind of become famous as time moves on, like, oh, that's where that happened. And then they started kind of building this site over it. Okay.
Well, and Constantine built it. It wasn't a church like you would go to on Sunday. It's still not. It's not like a Sunday basilica. It's not even the Pope's Sunday church. Yeah. That's St. John Lateran. It is a pilgrimage basilica because, and we can get into this, but the early Christians wanted to be near the bones and relics of their leaders and their famous heroes. And so Constantine built it so you could come and kind of process around it or come to it. And then it was dilapidated by the time you get into the 1500s. So that's where they said, the Renaissance guys said, let's build a new one. And they did, and the dome is right over it. But because the spot had been preserved essentially by that trophy from the 2nd century, which is living memory to people who saw it, it's likely to be the spot. Now, you asked me about the bones.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's what happens with the bones of Peter. You probably don't want to linger on this topic the whole podcast, but it is fascinating. Yeah. Which is that in the 20th century, they really did want to find these bones. And there was this guy named Ludwig Kass. He was a Nazi sympathizer who then escaped, or he was part of the Nazi German thing, and he came down to Rome. And they gave him the job of overseeing the Vatican building, the Basilica, St. Peter's Basilica. So they started excavating, and the professional archaeologists would work by day. But Ludwig Kass would come at night and poke around. He's just a Catholic churchman. He's not a professional archaeologist. And they kept looking at these different graves that should be in the right spot, and they could not find the bones of who they would think could be Peter. Well, Ludwig Kass one day, the trophy was one way, and there was kind of this later addition. It was called the Red Wall, or the Graffiti Wall, because it has this early Christian graffiti written all over, prayers to Peter. And so this graffiti wall is perpendicular to the trophy. And come to find out, it has a little receptacle in it, about kind of, waist high. And Ludwig Kass tells this digger that is employed by him, hey, what's in there? So the guy says, oh, there's bones. But because they're up off the ground and they're in this receptacle, they think, well, that's not going to be Peter's bones. Just put him in a box and stick him over here. So Ludwig Kass passes, but that worker is still on the scene. And the next archaeologist is Margherita Garducci, who is way more of a professional. She's like the best. It's a woman, which is shocking in the mid 1950s or whatever, but she's really, really world class, and she can read this graffiti and knows what it is. Well, one day, this guy who they're looking at this receptacle, and she's like, I wonder what was in there. And he's like, oh, ma'am, years ago, I took some bones out. And she's like, what? What are you talking? Yeah, oh, yeah, your predecessor told me to take these bones. They're in a box over here. And so they'd been ignored because they didn't think they came out of the ground. So they go and look in this box. We'll come to find out it has like golden and purple threads on them. It's the skeleton of a 1st century male of a robust frame. And so those are the bones that eventually the Pope says, that's it.
That's Peter.
Somehow they got moved up into that receptacle. And if you go down there, as you did, they have them on display in that little receptacle.
Like an
Just some guy named George.
Yes, an ossuary.
Yeah.
Yes, George.
Just some guy named George.
Don't say that, or the Pope will put you on the rack.
Well, I mean, it's
anyway,
funny. I was there.
Crazy.
And when I was like 30 years old, and kind of going through that. Isn't like a famous Christian buried in the Parthenon too? I remember going through there and looking at the names.
The Pantheon?
Not the
Pantheon.
Not the Parthenon here in
it's,
Nashville.
No,
it's
the
Victor
Parthenon.
Emmanuel,
Pantheon.
and it's one of the Renaissance artists who's there.
Yeah, there was some guys in there too. I remember.
I don't think there's any early Christians in the Pantheon, but...
Yeah, so when you go to Rome, I mean, obviously you're just seeing all this old stuff.
Oh my gosh, I love
around.
Rome. I've probably been 15 to 20 times.
Rome has more obelisks than Egypt, which is a fascinating bit of trivia.
They're all Egyptian.
They're all Egyptian.
The Romans went through it, and this is kind of a blurry thing, but the Romans had this huge fascination, this like Egyptophilia or something. Like they loved Egypt.
When you go into the Colosseum, you just they got that cross in there now.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see. So
Yeah.
how are they finding these Christians? I mean, what's defining them in the early days to pick them up and, torture them? I mean, how is the early church existing at that time?
Well, it is a bit of a mythology that it's kind of like everybody's persecuted constantly and like underground. Like for the most part, the truth is, for the most part, the Christians were left alone unless a kind of a pogrom would kind of well up, or some moment in time. Now, eventually you get in the 4th century, the 3rd century, you get this great persecution. And that is much more empire-wide. It's the 4th century. And before that, though, it's much more intermittent. But it could crop up at any time. So you live under the fear of it. And the instigating factor is often emperor worship. And that's huge. I mean, that fits this podcast too.
Right.
Because it's the powers. You know how the emperor worship worked? You had to make an offering to the genius. The word is genius. We would say genius. Like we would say like, oh, he's so brilliant. Einstein, he's a genius. Yeah. What you mean is there's some inhabiting spirit in him that's beyond mortal men, is what you're saying.
Everything started with this podcast with one big footprint.
And that guy, he doesn't need boots.
He don't.
He's got them built in.
But the rest of us do.
Well, Brunt Workwear is a new partner of Blurry Creatures, and they've got incredible work boots for all those guys out there and gals that are really punching the clock, working the hard hours, and making things happen here in America. Brunt boots are comfortable right out of the box, so you don't have to deal with weeks of blisters and a brutal break-in period. They've got options for every job, like waterproof, safety toe, soft toe, heavy duty, lace up or pull on, and you can actually wear them on real job site days to try them out. If they're not right, send them back for a full refund.
Yeah, you might have big feet, but they're not built like a Bigfoot. And so you need Brunt to help your feet feel better.
And right now, Brunt is giving away a crap ton of cash in the Brunt Potty of Gold sweepstakes, and one lucky winner is going to walk away with $50,000. So not only can you get the best work boots available, you might be the lucky winner of a big cash payday. The name is ridiculous, but the prize is very real. You can enter for free now through September 18th on their website. Just go create a Brunt account or log into the one you already have, and you'll start earning entries. And you can rack up even more entries to try to win $50,000 with Brunt by following Brunt on social, subscribing to emails and texts, and every dollar you spend through September 18th gets you even more entries. So for a limited time, our listeners can get $10 off at Brunt when you use code BLURRY at checkout. Nate and I got boots. Check these out. Just head to bruntworkwear.com, use code BLURRY, and while you're there, enter the Brunt Potty of Gold sweepstakes for your chance to win $50,000. Where's that, Nate?
That's bruntworkwear.com. Use code BLURRY.
the original word genius was that. It was the spirit that inhabited a clan or a great man or even a common man, his family. So it was like a empowering spirit behind great men. But when you're the greatest of the great, when you're the emperor, then his genius is all the more powerful. So you had to placate and worship and give honor to the genius of Caesar. But you know what the Greek, that's a Latin word. You know what the Greek equivalent of genius is? Daimon. Demon.
Yeah.
And so the early Christians, you say, why were they persecuted? If they were ever brought to the point, so even in the beginning, like Pliny the Elder says, or Pliny the Younger. Pliny the Younger says, the way you find a Christian is you try to make them deny Christ and swear by the Caesars, and the true ones won't do it. If they do it, let them go. They're clearly not a Christian. It's the real Christians who will not do it. Because as Jesus says, if you deny me before men, I will deny you before my Father in heaven. Like it's a Heiser thing. You're literally changing your allegiance. Yeah. It's like I'm renouncing my American citizenship and becoming a North Korean or something like that. Like I'm to deny Christ, to swear by the genius of Caesar, is to do that. And so the true Christians wouldn't do it, and that's when they would often be put to death.
So why Peter? Of all the disciples, you think that's like most famous? Is it just because his grave is, everyone knows where it is?
Well, it's because he's the founding of the Catholic Church, right?
It's Matthew 16:18.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
If you go into the dome, tu es Petrus, et super hanc Petram adefacabo ecclesiam meam, et tibi double clavis regni calorum. You are Peter. And these letters
are 5 times fast.
They're like Luke's height, the letters are as tall as you.
They're huge.
Yeah.
They're taller than me.
It's on this, on this rock I'll build my church.
And so you are Peter and on this rock. And there's a lot of importance.
But we've learned a lot about like where that rock was and kind of some more blurry history behind it.
Tell me, what's the blurry concept of that rock?
Well, that was the gates to hell where Jesus is preaching.
Right.
Yeah, Caesarea Philippi,
So
it's at the base of Mount Hermon.
Yeah. Right.
So
it could just be a little bit of an overread of what Jesus is saying there. Like this rock, this is the gate to the underworld. Yeah. This is where I'm building my church, not you, Peter. Yeah. You're the rock.
But as Jesus is, though, I think that we've always kind of contended that there's, much like a parable, there's sort of multiple meanings to all of it.
Yes, that's right.
So he's declaring his dominance over the dark powers and that place of defilement. He's also charging Peter.
Yes.
And he's also claiming victory. So he's doing all these things.
Yeah, it could
and
be
they all fit, right?
Meanings.
It's the yes and.
Yeah, because the apostles are the foundation of the church in Ephesians. Like I don't take it as meaning a pope, but I do think when Jesus says you are Peter and on this rock, he doesn't like flip it back to himself. That's an evangelical interpretation. You are Peter, but on me, the rock, I will build my church.
Yeah.
I think he's doing a kind of an Ephesians thing where he says, you are Peter, and your generation will be the foundation of my church.
Of the church.
But there's also that conquest of the...
Well, then we have Acts, right? And this is what you wrote in your book on, and the apostles after the day of Pentecost and all, they're taking the gospel, they're evangelizing to the edges of the earth, to Spain, as we talked about pre-roll, as far as they could go. Yeah. And so these guys go out, right? And I know that famously, like we wonder what happens to him. And we got Peter kind of, we think we know where he's at. He's underneath of the church there.
I think it's a good chance. I give it a high likelihood that at least that's the spot of his grave. And pretty decent chance those are his bones.
So all the people buried there are Christians.
The other people in the necropolis, many of them weren't because it was pre-Christian necropolis. Okay. But as you progress closer to Peter's grave, you get second century graves that are clearly Christian. There's one in which Jesus is like a charioteer rising above the heavens, and he's this solar imagery. So later, and maybe those aren't second, third, I forget the time, but those are after Peter. Some Christians said, I want to be buried near the prince, near Peter. I want to be buried near him.
So I want to go through like all the other ones.
It'd take a long time.
Let's go to, but I wanted to ask you at the beginning of the show, like, what would you, if you could get a first century Christian or like early church father in the room with like a modern theologian today, and they were having a conversation, how do you think that would go down? How different would they be, and how confused of each other would they be, you think?
That's a good question. I mean, if you sort of put out all the, the modern, what's a TV, whatever, like if they were just talking theology and could communicate, I actually think there'd be a lot of overlap. I don't know if they would totally understand like a modern worship set with like the smoke. Although they could get to the smoke. If you put a little incense in the smoke, you could suddenly make that work. And I don't know if they could understand that. But if you put them in a more liturgical church, I think they would kind of get what that is all about. Or like the earliest generations, you put them in like a house church setting. I think they would understand what that would be like. And once you start to talk about the risen Christ, then there'd be a lot of overlap. They might wonder why, if you start talking about the gospel, they might wonder why you keep talking about personal sin and being afraid of death, and you don't bring in the third part of that, which is victory over the powers. Like the fathers might think that should be part of the gospel message.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I feel like that'd be a wild ride to be on fly on the wall for that conversation.
When I get to heaven, I'm going to spend the first 10,000 years exclusively with ancient church fathers. I've got forever.
Yeah, that's such a short time.
In fact, I believe in a literal millennium. So I might just use my 1,000 years to hang out with the ancient fathers and have them tour me around Rome.
Well, it's cool because like we just did an episode with Tara Lee Coble, and she asked us like, what disciple would we want to hang out with?
Yeah.
And Jude was my pick because he wrote a lot of the weird, blurry stuff, and so he had this.
He's into Enoch.
Yeah, he had this this kind of mind that I felt like would be interesting to interview.
And he's the brother of Jesus.
Yeah, there's a lot there, but I think that all these guys are, the founders and the fathers of why we still believe today, and they all kind of went on their own paths.
Yeah.
So Peter's grave is sort of the most famous, and obviously he's probably the most famous disciple.
Yeah, I mean,
besides
to evangelicals, Paul kind of takes precedence over Peter. You know what I mean? Like the Catholics put Peter at top because of the papal thing, but born again Christians tend to put Paul in Peter's place.
He wrote most of the theology.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And you get his story in Acts a little bit more in detail than
so what about Paul's demise?
I love that church in Rome.
Yeah.
Hey, you've been to Rome?
Yes.
Okay. And did you go out to the other one, St. Paul outside the walls?
I don't know.
It's been a while for you.
We did.
That's a great church. Yeah. Whenever I take students there, they love it. St. Paul outside the walls, it's called. Because and the Vatican is outside the ancient city walls too, but you never buried inside the city walls. So if any church is outside the walls, it's a grave church. It's over some saint or apostolic grave. And so it was just outside the ancient city walls on the Ostian way. So it was on the road south out to the coast, out to Ostia, which was Rome's port. And there's good traditions too about Paul. Paul was a Roman citizen. So unlike Peter, you couldn't, put him in a burning cloak and, burn him up and torture him. You got a better death if you got sentenced to death if you were a citizen. So he was beheaded. And there's good evidence. And of course, we know he got there because, the book of Acts tells us that. Now, did he go out to Spain and come back? There's debates, but there's good evidence that Paul's executed in Rome, outside the city.
Yeah, because the Bible doesn't explicitly talk about how or when he's.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Acts ends. Well, and 2 Timothy, he's in a kind of imprisonment, which is more intense than what he's in Acts 28. So it's likely that's a second imprisonment.
Is this under Nero?
Yeah, under Nero.
Okay.
Yeah, and so like in Acts, it's said it's Jesus. Is it an angel or Jesus around the time of the shipwreck that says, "Don't worry, I've appointed you." I think it's Jesus who says, "You're going to go testify in front of the emperor," and that would have been Nero.
Wow.
In the 60s.
Nate, listen, gold and precious metals have been around since the dawn of time. The Spanish conquistadors in South America were looking for the city of gold, El Dorado. Wow. They never found it.
Think it's real?
It might be. But if they had been smart, they would have taken their pieces of 8, their Spanish coins, and they would have bought gold to hedge against the uncertainty in the financial world.
And listen, we've talked to people with near-death experiences who've seen the gold streets in heaven, Luke.
There's no shortage up there. But down here,
It's a little harder to get.
it's a little scarcer. And when you look at today's financial system, it certainly does feel like most things are being flipped upside down. And as believers, I believe we're called to be good stewards of what we've been given. And that's why we partner with the Better Business Bureau A+ rated gold and silver company, Goldco. They've helped thousands of people diversify their life savings with physical gold and silver, including us. We got some silver, Nate.
Yeah. Gold is like the big guy. He's made it through wars, forest fires, all the things, market crashes, collapsing empires, and thousands of years of human beings making bad decisions. Gold stands the course.
And Goldco has over 8,000 5-star reviews, and they focus on education, making it simple to see how physical metals could help anchor your family's savings. For our community, they're doing something special, Nate. They're going to send a free gold and silver kit straight to your door. And even better, you could get up to 10% back in free silver to help you get started. That's only available while supplies last.
You want your podcast blurry, but not your future.
So help protect what you've worked for and head over to blurrygold.com. That's blurrygold.com. So if he gets beheaded, then he's buried outside the city walls.
Yep. So like Peter, there was a trophy put up. We know this because that deacon says there's a trophy on the Vatican and there's a trophy for Paul on the Ostian Way. So around the year 200, there is something there. Now, we don't know what that is. But so what happens again is that Constantine, because the trophy marked the spot, when Constantine says, I want to patronize the Christians, I want to support you, I want to give churches for your famous sites, they put a little chapel up in the 4th century there, which then a little bit later in the 4th century became a huge basilica. It was so popular, they were like, this chapel isn't cutting it. We need a big church. And that church stayed there from the late 4th century until 1823. So that's why I think there's a pretty even better chance that the grave and the bones are legitimate, is because it was just encapsulated. There wasn't all this funny business. But a workman up on the roof in 1823 accidentally started a fire. And so this glorious church mostly burned. Some of it survived. So if you go there today, you can see the arch, and there's this mosaic, and it says this church is sanctified by the body of Paul, the teacher of the world. Because Paul is the ultimate reversal of the Deuteronomy 32. I mean, Paul is the mouthpiece to go to Malachi 1:11 to the where the sun sets, to the end of the world. And so he's called the doctor of the nations, the teacher of the nations. And so that church today, if you go to it, has the same thing where you can sort of peek into a window.
Okay.
And there's a sarcophagus in there. And I want to say it was like 2009 or something, not that long ago. They drilled into it and they did a testing on the bones, and they found that they are 1st century male bones.
Really?
Yeah.
Where is that in relation to Peter?
So it's out. If you went there today, it would feel like you're still in Rome, but historically you were outside the walls of Rome.
So I'm no professional here, but I think most people understand, obviously, like in church history, there's like the Orthodox and then the Catholics.
Right.
And you have different traditions.
Yeah, there's others too. The Assyrian Church of the East.
And then you have modern day Christians who think any sort of homage or worship to relics or people that are dead is bad.
Okay, let's talk.
Okay.
This is
what's
a good
coming.
topic?
Yes, this is good because we didn't get to
huge.
Thomas's relics. Should we do Thomas first and then get to the reasons?
Sure. Let's do Thomas. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So Paul's outside the walls. That church is probably the location of Paul's death.
Yeah.
We don't know much, but it's assumed he's beheaded by Nero after being imprisoned, which we get from 2 Timothy. Is that if I'm
First Timothy? Then there's the Acts of Paul is a 2nd century text which tells the details of it.
Oh, wow.
And so the 2nd century is plenty close enough for living memory to have been recorded.
Okay.
And so most of that text is Paul and this lady named Thecla, who like trots around with him and does all these like daring deeds, and she's like this heroine, and she's in danger, and she's kind of a damsel in distress, but she's heroic. But in the end of it is this part called the martyrdom of Paul, and it talks about his confrontation. Always, both Peter and Paul, in both of these 2nd century texts that talk about their martyrdom, it's all couched in battle language. Nero is the enemy, just as he is in like the book of Revelation, where he's like, he's the ultimate antichrist.
Yeah.
And then the language is Paul or Peter are recruiting warriors or soldiers for Christ. And Nero is indignant. How dare you try to recruit your kingdom's fighters in my territory? So there's this territory thing, there's this invasion motif, there's this Christian like raising this underground army. And so they get executed because they are like seditious against the kingdom of Nero, which is hugely blurry, really. And so these, all martyrdom is like that actually. All the martyrs are in they are sacraments of a cosmic combat.
Wow.
They are, what is a sacrament? It's a physical representation of a higher truth. The death of Christ, his blood, his body broken is seen visibly. Or baptismal waters shows the interior cleansing.
Right.
And so a sacrament is a visible word. It's a proclamation of a truth that you can see. So the martyrs are sacraments of the cosmic combat because they are fighting the Romans or the authorities. They're in a sporting place, a sporting arena, which is a warfare place, actually.
Yeah.
And it's a metaphor for war. But the higher battle is always with Satan and his forces. So how do we get on that? Peter and Paul's stories of martyrdom are couched as warfare against Rome and the gods.
And the powers of darkness.
The powers of darkness, yeah. But you asked about Thomas.
Yeah. And then we'll get to this and get to the reason of the bones, because this has got to be fascinating. I mean, and we'll get to that, but there's a ton in the Bible about the significance of bones. But what happens with Thomas?
Huge. Bones are huge. Whole kingdoms in church history rose and fell on whether they could have bones.
Which is wild.
Oh yeah. The bones of Mark in Venice. Oh my gosh. How they got secretly stolen from Alexandria.
So the early church fathers they had no problem with these things.
We have to come back to it because we got to do Thomas.
We'll do Thomas then.
So if you go to Rome today and you're at St. John Lateran, which is the Pope's official church, near there is Santa Croce in Jerusalem, which is the sacred cross in Jerusalem. And it used to be Constantine's mother's palace, her personal palace, Helena. Helena is the one that went to the Holy Land and started all these churches there. And among the things that she did is that she supposedly found the fragments of the true cross. So I've written novels about this. Some of my fiction.
So that got passed around.
Well, there's a whole bunch of things that purport to be the true cross or fragments of the true cross. But maybe the most famous one was that Helena found it. But if you go to Santa Croce, so she literally brought dirt from Jerusalem, or someone did at some point, and they spread it on the floor so that like, oh, I'm walking in the dirt of Jerusalem, like it's under the ground, like I'm in the Holy Land. Yeah. We brought a little bubble of the Holy Land to Rome for pilgrims to go to. So there's relics there. They have the crossbar of the good thief. They have thorns from the crown. But the main relic that you can find in Santa Croce is this it's like this silver urn. It's behind glass, and there's like this finger bone, and it's the bone of Thomas, with which he probed the wounds of Christ. Is that true? So Thomas, all the traditions about him point east. Like you were just talking about Catholics and Greek Orthodox. Yeah. And so those are the Western traditions. You know, if you look at like Paul's journeys, even these books, Paul's journeys, he's going west. He's going to the end of the earth, and he knows perfectly well, I cannot get to the end of the earth to the east because the Silk Road goes to China, what they knew was China. I can't get that far. If I'm going to get to the end of the earth, I got to go west because I can get to Hispania. Hispania is in the Roman Empire. That's the end of the world, to the west. So all of Paul's missionary journeys go west, but many Christians go east on the Silk Road. And they don't have the Greek language. They don't have the Latin language, of course. They have Aramaic, or what's called Syriac, which is essentially Hebrew, Aramaic. So they're still speaking the language of Jesus himself. Wow. And they go east into the Syriac-speaking church, which is the Assyrian Church of the East, the Church of the Middle East, the Church of Iraq and Iran, Persia, the Parthian Empire, right? So Thomas is completely associated with that trajectory. And there's two different Thomas traditions. So like he gets to India, they say, but there's two areas. Is it northern India or southern India? Both would have been reachable. So like northern India would be kind of if you went from Antioch down the Silk Road, and you have to go through Edessa, which is probably where his body ended up, Edessa. But even further, you get into like northern India, and the stories of the Acts of Thomas talk about a king named Gondophares, who's a real king in sort of what we would call Pakistan or Afghanistan or India or the Indus River Valley. So there was like tradition about Christians going there. But there's also today in India, the southern part of India, Kerala, the Malabar coast, that's where the Christian castes are today for the most part, the ancient Christians. And they have these ancient songs and pillars that record a very early Christian presence. Wow. And that was very reachable from Egypt. So there you would go from Egypt, you would go by sea, the Red Sea, and just kind of cut around. And the Romans were totally trading with that part of India. So which one is Thomas? I think if it was one or the other, it was probably the northern one. And eventually his body gets brought to Edessa.
Does he die as a martyr?
Yeah, he dies as a martyr. Later, the Portuguese come. Now this is like, the 1400s or something like that. And the Portuguese Catholics come to India, and they cook up a story. There's a grave in Chennai, which is on the east, and he was speared and all this stuff. I think that's probably folklore. Oh. It's too late. But he does die as a martyr.
Yeah.
He's speared.
He's speared.
Speared, I think, is what happened.
More than likely in the northern
Pakistan. Yes,
yeah.
And that's
kind
what
of
you're hearing.
He tried the spear and
the spirit of Christ. Yeah. Often they imitate Christ. Imitatio Christi is a huge martyrdom motif, that the martyr dies like Christ, he's crucified, or in some way imitates what
making
Jesus
fun
did.
Of him. Yeah.
Well, no. It's however
mocking,
the person.
Right? No?
I don't think most of the soldiers were aware enough of theology to make a mockery.
Yeah.
It's more that the Christians reinterpret the details of the story to show them as a Christ figure.
Right?
Yeah. It's more of a reading of what happened, or eyewitness remembrance.
Isn't it sort of like, isn't it elevated as well, Brian? Like where if there's something even more sacred to die as Christ dies,
So
but not exactly, because Peter wants to be upside down, or if that folklore is true, right?
So that kind of set the scene. You've got different guys going different places based on languages they know and other traditions. And then
they just divide the world up, and they're like,
some
we're
of them
going
aren't
this way.
listening to Michael W. Smith. Well, they're not going west.
They're go west.
I thought of that too, actually.
There are traditions, like for example, Rufinus says, after Jesus went to heaven, all of the apostles got together and formulated the Apostles' Creed. And then they all apportioned out where they're going to go, and each one, gets assigned a territory, and each one contributes a clause to the Apostles' Creed, and then now they go and take it everywhere. So is it that organized? Is there like a mission sending organization? It's much more organic.
Well, because you can see, like, when we grow up, like, Peter and Paul had a little bit of they were like,
oh yeah,
they argue about stuff.
That's a huge thing, actually. In Galatians, that's a huge aspect of early Christian studies of Peter and Paul.
Growing up in the church, you just think, they all just get along. It was this rosy story. They go off and everything.
There's tension in the New Testament, but the martyrdom stories put them back together.
Sure.
The martyrdom stories, they call it twinning them. They get twinned. So they even say, I think it's June 6th, is that when they were going to their martyrdom, Peter and Paul met on their respective paths and exchanged a kiss, and then each went to their martyrdom.
Wow.
So whereas the New Testament has some friction between Peter and Paul, like for example, in Romans 16, Peter writes to all these people. He doesn't mention Peter. Why doesn't he? Peter was probably there at that time. But anyway,
he leaves them out. Paul's like, we're not talking about Peter right now.
I mean, that's what scholars say, is that even in the New Testament era, there was this kind of tension that they had agreed to work in Rome in separate spheres. I'll go to the Gentiles, you go to the Jews.
Okay.
Or something like that.
Divide up
kind of divide it up. But anyway, we were talking about Thomas.
Kind of early church drama.
So Thomas more than likely is speared in Pakistan, and somehow his finger is
So what
retrieved.
happens is Edessa, because it wasn't quite, it was in the boundary where it was sometimes in the Roman Empire, sometimes in the Parthian Empire. It has enough, it gets scooped into the Roman orbit. And so Edessa becomes the place where his bones and his grave is. So in the 4th century, this lady pilgrim comes from Spain, and she does a Holy Land pilgrimage, and she's in the Holy Land, but she goes up to Edessa and says, look, they have a beautiful church. Thomas's grave is here. But when the Crusaders come, the Crusaders create a kingdom of Edessa, Like there's 4 Crusader states. One of them is the Crusader state, the kingdom of Edessa. So now the Crusaders are in charge of that area, and they bring his relics back to Italy. Ortona, I think, is the town. So his full skeleton is there. But I guess one of the popes was like, you know what, guys? We need the finger. like most of Thomas isn't famous. There's one part of Thomas that's super famous, and that's his finger. So they get the finger into Rome.
Brian, how sure, based on the record, are we that skeleton belongs to Thomas?
In a book that I did, another book called After Acts, where I look at these traditions, I give a report card where I score these things, and I forget the score that I gave, but like the reality of the finger, pretty low. I want to say like D-. Thomas going to India or the Far East or the middle, that would have been sort of a middle area for them. Likely. Yeah. His grave in Edessa, pretty likely.
Okay.
Yeah. But real finger, I'd be more confident of Peter or Paul than I would of Thomas.
All right, so to Nate's question, then, as we circle back, this idea of like kind of this, why the bones? Is this the cult? I think you said when we were talking about pre-interview, like the cult of the saints, this idea that like, why are these things so important?
Yep. Well, for one thing, you do have some scriptural basis for this. People say, oh, that's just nonsense. But you have like the bones of Elisha in 2 Kings, when someone is dead and their body gets dumped into the grave next to Elisha's bones, he comes back to life. And so you're like, that's in the Bible. Or in Acts, you have handkerchiefs that even just touch the apostles. They not only do healings, they do exorcisms. That's in the book of Acts. Wow. The handkerchiefs that swipe up against an apostle are able to be transferred. So these are called brandeia. They're called contact relics. They're something that contacted the holy, and the holiness imbues itself into that item that can then be taken away. So like the grave of Peter in this church outside the walls, the early version of the church
or
before
Paul.
it burned.
Outside the wall, or Peter or Paul?
Paul. Thank you for correcting me. Yes, Paul. Paul. The grave of Paul, the slab that's on top of it, it says, Paul, apostle and martyr. And there are these holes in it. So it was the marble cover of his grave, but it has holes cut in the top. And they would put a handkerchief on a string, and they would lower it down so it could contact the bones, and then they'd pull it up, and then you'd have the martyr's holiness would be there or the saint's holiness was in the cloth. Now that sounds so ridiculously superstitious.
It does, yeah.
But you know who it doesn't sound superstitious to? All Christians prior to the Enlightenment. This is actually not only the biblical worldview, but the church historical worldview until the Enlightenment pulled the holy and the sort of, de-enchanted the world.
But is this the worldview of everyone at the time too?
Yes. Yes. The bones of the saints were the absolute most important thing a kingdom could have. Every mighty king who wanted to create a Christian kingdom in the Middle Ages, they had to build a cathedral. They had to have an altar with saintly bones underneath it.
And the theology around this, I guess, as you said, comes from Acts, right? We've got stuff in the scriptures that says that things that have contact with. Yeah. So it's hard to imagine how this, like from our standpoint, post-Enlightenment and more just materialistic, logically thinking, it's hard to make this not feel funny. Yeah, like Jason, what was it? Jason Giambi wearing a golden thong for the Yankees to break out of his slump. It feels like baseball. You don't touch the line.
Well, even the people in the Blurry verse who understand all these things are still like, that's crossing the line. That's too much. That's too far.
I'm glad you say that, and I want to kind of go on your record here and say, like, I am not a person trying to stir up evangelical Christians to worship bones of the saints.
No. Yeah.
Like I love the catacombs, and there's a spiritual beauty and power of the catacombs, and I'm very much aware of kind of that, but I'm not trying to say that that's proper. However, let's think about what was in their mind. It
wasn't a problem to them.
No, because whenever you see healings in Scripture, you lay hands. So, for example, the woman with the issue of blood.
Yeah.
She just incidentally brushes up against Jesus, and it says power left him.
Yeah.
So power is like a substance that can flow through physical contact. That's just that's a blurry verse. That's a biblical worldview.
Yeah.
Is that power and is it for good or for ill? Because it can flow out to do damage too, right? And so whenever you heal, so like Ananias, he lays hands on Paul and the scales fall away. Or when in the shipwreck on Malta, when Paul wants to heal somebody, he lays hands on him and the power flows through. Jesus heals through saliva and mud and laying hands. So power has physical contact as its conduit.
Yeah. So, I mean, Jesus, during his ministry, is that kind of, are there churches around that are built on some of the people that have died in the past or in that time, you think? Or
not in Jesus' day. I mean, you'd have.
So you got some of these
So
old,
with that was, of course, the Jewish So the Jews have always been, it's always been important to bury.
Yes.
They don't cremate. The body is treated as a kind of a holy thing. And so you do get these like famous graves of,
the patriarchs.
the patriarchs or something like, like
we think about
Abraham's.
Joseph, like really
Joseph,
one his bones has got to
Exactly,
return, right?
exactly.
And then we think about like, there's that really wild story in Jude about Satan and Michael fighting over the bones of Moses.
Okay.
That's what I was saying.
That is biblical and overlooked.
Yeah.
When I say I'm not trying to get people to worship bones, of course not. Am I trying to say that we're overlooking something that the ancients took for granted, both testaments and the early church and the medieval church actually? Yes. And that is that the presence of the holy, like this what this book is about, is that the temple, which was to come into the physical place to access God in the Holy of Holies, has been inverted. Now we are the temple of God.
Yeah.
You want to access the divine, you access it in bodies. I mean, Mary, think about this. God, the first place that God ever became incarnate was in the womb of a virgin. She becomes the temple. A lot of the traditions say Mary, as a little girl, worked in the temple as a weaver, that she wove the veil of the Holy of Holies.
That's wild if true, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a 2nd century story, Proto-Evangelium of James. And if it were true, it could be remarkable. But at the very least, we know that God chose, who is the least in society? Male or female? Female.
Woman,
Who among females is, insignificant? Not the older wise woman, the young girl who's accomplished nothing. Who's even worse? One who is, thought to have had sex outside of wedlock and is not a virgin. I mean, she was the bottom of the social hierarchy. And God says, that's going to be my temple. Right when Herod thought that the temple had to be this magnificent golden building.
The juxtaposition.
And God says, no, the kind of God that I am is the kind of God that makes the lowest of the low in your society as my temple. And he takes up habitation in the womb of the virgin.
Wow.
That's
crazy.
good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
We were talking about that yesterday.
Yeah.
The disciples of fishermen, they're kind of flunk outs of making it to the
the weak things of the world.
Yeah, they didn't make it to the top of the the academic paradigm.
No.
And so, but Jesus says, follow me.
Yeah.
They're instantly in.
Yeah.
And now he's their rabbi.
Yeah.
I think that the bones. I mean, obviously, we've talked about how other cultures and like especially the giants, that went all over the place, are making these burial mounds and putting their bones in specific.
And they're venerated.
Yeah. And they're worshiping those bones of their ancestors. And those things are here in America and all over.
Yeah.
And it's
Mississippian culture and all of that.
Yeah, it's weird. And these
where does it jump the shark though? Is it jump the shark when you begin to pray to these bones or begin to
Yes. I don't think you pray or address these things.
Yeah.
So what you need to do to make it real or relevant for today is to tell their stories, because a big part of the pilgrimage and the orientation of going to the grave is to tell the story along the way. And to rehearse the life of the saint. I mean, that's what Chaucer wrote about in Canterbury Tales. They're all going to the grave of a saint and they're telling the stories along the way.
And it changes you. Go when you go through Rome, you see all this ancient history, you see the Colosseum, you see these graves, you see these ancient churches.
Yeah.
I mean, you leave and you're like, I do not take whatever I'm doing as serious as as I did before I came here.
Well, and I've seen that so many times because I take students on these trips.
Yeah.
And one of the main things that I want them to do is to see that their faith is not just, smoke and rock bands in 2026. That's fine if it is, but that there's also this kind of antiquity and this historicity, and the word that I would really use is Catholicity with a little c, that they belong to something so much bigger, that these people that we're telling, not just biblical figures as important as they are, but the saints of the ages, both men and women, are part of this thing called the church, this warrior, these brave people that are taking the message of the gospel and they're beating back the powers of evil, and the gates of hell will not withstand. And so modern Christians, and so, Luke, you say, well, what do we do with the saints today? We don't worship their bones or pray to their bones. We live into the legacy of the Hebrews 11.
Yeah.
Let us also run with endurance the race that is set before us, as we all run towards the
It's a marker,
King.
right? It's a bar. You go, let us see the bar that's set and try to run that race.
I used to begin one of my church history classes with that. Do you want to be the lazy generation?
Yeah.
I'll say it to your listeners. Do you want to be the sloppy, lazy generation? Do you not see what Hebrews 11, the heroes of the faith? Do you not see the martyrs of the church, the apostles, all those that came after? The bar is set high. Yeah. Raise the bar, Christian, in 2026 or whenever. Strive even higher for Jesus.
Brian, what do we do with stories? I just quickly there's more modern day stories. I actually watched a special on this. I can't remember what it was. There was a whole series, probably on Netflix, about relics and stuff. Mm-hmm. And there are purportedly modern day people that encounter things. You mentioned the true cross or some of the bones of the saints, and
Shroud of Turin, maybe.
And they Shroud, which we just actually this week.
Kathy's big.
Today.
Kathy's big. You ought to have Kathy back on the Shroud.
Well, we said Jeremiah Johnson just did. That episode comes out today for us.
Okay.
But the people are still purportedly encountering or having a miraculous encounter or experience with relics, and that's kind of hard for a lot of people too. To be like, doesn't healing power come from the Holy Spirit, and doesn't that come from Jesus? And yet and some people will either go, it's a zero sum. They'll go, well, that's just all demonic, and what's happening with saint worship and saint prayer. Maybe that stuff can happen, or maybe there's this and viewpoint from antiquity that says that this is. And what do we do with some of that?
Okay, that's a great question. Yeah, let me speak to that. I think it's important. And another way this would come up would be icons in the Greek Orthodox Church, where you're praying towards an icon, you're praying to a saint. So I've thought a lot about these topics. I think the way to handle it theologically is to go back to the incarnation, so that in the incarnation, what you see is that the eternal and the divine, the second person of the Trinity, has forever joined himself in perfect unity with materiality. And in that moment, he takes all cosmic materiality into it. He doesn't just take a body. He takes the cosmos into himself. God joins himself to physical material existence. And so what that does is it kind of re-enchants the material, that it doesn't bifurcate them in this Platonic way where the realm of the forms is up here and the realm of matter is no good. But it re-enchants, and maybe that's not quite the right word, but it re-spiritualizes physicality, which is why bread and the cup can give us spiritual power, which is why water and baptism, which is why pilgrimages to holy lands. And so the places where a person was buried or the lands where they walked, people say, do the footsteps of Paul, do the footsteps of the heroes of church history, even, Reformation. There's a kind of incarnational truth that the material earthly plane is connected with the spiritual world, and it's liminal, right? Yeah, liminal. I mean, that's a great word for you guys. It's the word where there's a line and you're sort of both and. You're on one side of the line and on the other side of the line at the same time. You're liminal, and that's blurry. The line is very blurry.
Yeah, the lines are blurred.
It's the back of the wardrobe, right? It's like you're through the wardrobe and there's Narnia back there. Yeah. And so you handle those kind of things not by worshiping bones, but by recognizing that earthly places where events happen, territories that are given over, places where footsteps were walked and mighty deeds were done and deaths were died and even interment and memory is physical. I mean, even our brains are putting memory
Yeah.
into a physical form. And so physicality and memory go together. And so why would we not think that spiritual realities and forces are interconnected with these nodes, these little nodes around the world of places where things
like
happen?
cosmic space.
I think most Christians would feel like their discernment goes off, or they feel uneasy if they walked into the temple and they see incense burning.
Oh, no.
And they see the
That's
Ark of the
biblical.
Covenant. And inside are items, staff, Aaron's staff, right? And then the
Tablets
menorah.
of the law.
Tablets,
the
the
tablets.
menorah. Out,
And so these items are important.
Of course, they'd be dead by having walked into the whole place.
But for a moment.
Yeah, for the moment, wow.
But you know what I'm saying,
Yeah,
though?
I do.
A modern Christian would be offended by, and the design that God set up.
Yeah.
And I think that you have all these stories of these items.
But they are offended by it. A lot of Christians are offended by it when they walk into, like, in Bethlehem, the Church of the Nativity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or they walk into a Greek Orthodox church today. And they're like, this is, what's going on? This is horrible. What's this incense? Well, like, the incense is the prayers of the saints. Like, like God inhabits this incense, like, as these prayers go up. And, smells and bells. And so liturgy and structure, all of these things are actually deeply a part of Old Testament worship.
Yeah.
Not as much New Testament, because it was a kind of a house church movement.
Yeah.
But as soon as the Christians were able to begin sort of constructing a Christian apparatus, they constructed an Old Testament type of apparatus.
It's amazing, because I think that, like, when you're talking about the physical and how much Christ becomes physical and how important that is. I mean, people will say, because I believe there was a tree in the Garden of Eden because of the cross, not because, like, I could go back and understand Eden. I can understand the cross. And so I know that piece of wood is symbolic all the way back. And so obviously if somebody finds the cross somewhere later, there's going to be something significant about, this is the cross that Jesus died on. And there's probably rumors for, hundreds of years of this is actually the wood that Jesus.
So in the place where that was found, there's in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem today, deep underground, you go down steps, there's the Chapel of St. Helena. And that's the place where she supposedly found it. People don't know this. It's hard to find. And one of these monks or whatever, has control of this area where there is an ancient Christian graffiti, and it depicts a boat. And so these are pilgrims that came, and this is deep underground. So this would have been like under the Temple Mount, because the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. So some Christians got themselves to the I'm sorry, it's not the Temple Mount. It's the plaza that Hadrian had put over the grave of Jesus. So Emperor Hadrian puts a plaza, like a temple to Venus, over the grave of Jesus. So it's not the Temple Mount, but it was a platform like that. And these Christians got themselves underneath that platform and crawled in and got as close as they could to where the empty tomb would have been. Because again, Hadrian was trying to obscure it with a pagan temple. But in so doing, he marked out
He's like,
the
here's the
spot.
spot.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what happened. Because Constantine says, get rid of that platform. We're going to put the Church of the Holy Sepulchre right there.
Yeah.
And so the hill of Golgotha stuck up out of that plaza. But anyway, these Christians got there, and they made a graffiti of a boat. So they came by sea, and they wrote the words, "Lord, we have come." And what did the angels say in the tomb? Come.
Yeah.
See the place where he lay.
And
these Christians got underneath a pagan temple's platform and left a graffiti that they got as close as they could. But that's the area where the fragment of the cross was found.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
That's crazy.
That is crazy. It's
Now,
just
again, I'm not saying that, like if you found that wood, it would have power in and of itself. I don't think.
But I think to some people though, right, and this was to a conversation we had with Jeremiah Johnston, is that tangible evidence, as you just pointed out as well, like tangible places and purported tangible evidence are like signposts for apologetics, really, to say, I just don't believe something that feels far away, or, I just don't need more faith. I can actually go touch things and see things and walk places, and I can see, walk, be to the physicality, to the to the liminal. Like I can be there. And there's a power to that. We were supposed to be in Israel this last spring. Of course, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
But we will be next spring.
Okay.
As long as the war doesn't start again.
Yeah.
But part of that too was to go see and be in those places where Christ walked,
that's
and
great.
the places of Scripture, right? And being in Rome was super cool for for some of that.
That is such a, like you were saying before, that's such a transformative thing in someone's Christian life. Like pilgrimage is a huge thing. Everybody should try to do it.
I don't know where the line is. I think we've become we've removed ourselves so far from history, and just the ancients and how they viewed things, that even if you read and Moses had a staff. Mm-hmm. Why? That's not. God doesn't work that way.
Raises it up, and parts the water with it.
And it isn't.
They put a serpent on it.
He's losing the war when his hands go down, and then there's all these interesting stories that kind of blur the lines between a physical item and a relationship with God.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the answer is.
Think about John 3:16. That is everybody's favorite. Like that is
Tebow, baby.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, you hold it up at the end zone of the stadium.
Talking about every field goal. Yeah.
Nobody ever, notices the verses that are right before that, which is that the pole in the Old Testament with the serpents on it, and it was lifted up in order to be salvation. You know what I mean? Like you were saying about like the cross and the trees and so forth. I mean, there are all these like images of that. Like you've got the tree in the Garden of Eden. You've got the tree of life in the book of Revelation. Cursed is he who was hung upon a tree. Like the tree that joins the tree that joins, the two trees at either end is the tree of Christ in the middle of it, which is prefigured by that, where the pole looking up at the tree is what brought you salvation. Why there was snakes, that's a little strange to me.
So we've covered some of the relics and the ends of these apostles, but like, I think one of the things that as an early church guy, the first believers, they operated in a world that they understood, I think much more like what we talked about, like the Heiser paradigm, right? And this side of cosmic powers and kingdom of darkness, spiritual entities, demons inhabiting temples, fallen angels were active in history. How did the church fathers view this worldview? We kind of touched on the beginning, but like what we talked about, the communion of the saints and the graves, putting anything down into Paul's grave, relics, of course,
martyrdom, and cosmic combat. Do you guys know Gustav Aulén? Have you ever heard of this guy?
No.
Good friends.
Yeah, well, no, he's
Gustav. He's not the same guy that was digging around for Peter.
He's not alive. It's a book. It's a book.
Different Gustav.
Christus Victor is the name of his book. Christus Victor. So if you probably heard the concept is huge.
Yes.
And so he was a Swedish bishop, I think, in a Lutheran in the 1930s or whatever. And his book is published. Christus Victor is like Heiser before Heiser for the ancient church. Like basically what Gustav Aulén says is that
this is an atonement theory.
It's an atonement theory. Yeah. Exactly right. Yeah. It's a theory of the atonement that later comes to emphasize like legal methods and substitution and things like that.
Penal substitution,
and I'm a huge believer in penal substitution. Like I would never think we should lose that doctrine. I think it's huge. It's essential. It's what Billy Graham said at every crusade. It's how everybody comes to Christ. Is Christ took my punishment, died in my place. I don't ever want to lose that soteriology. But what Aulén shows in Christus Victor is that in the Middle Ages under Anselm, you get more of an orientation of the atonement toward God, where God is something is being given toward God. And what Aulén says is that, well, that takes the emphasis on God being the one who carries it through from the beginning. And so what Aulén says in Christus Victor is that there was a pre-medieval ancient Christus Victor view in which God himself is reconciling the world to himself. He's the initiator. He's the one who comes in. He sends forth the Son. It's not that there's this transaction where God is the recipient of the Son's transaction. I think that's in Scripture, but there's also the idea where what Aulén calls is the dramatic. It's the story method, by which there's this kind of divine story of invasion and defeating of the cosmic powers. And so like Aulén is laying these things out, reorienting soteriology in the ancient church to what it really was, sort of forgotten.
Yeah.
That's why I say it's like Heiser before Heiser.
Well, I remember either Heiser said this on our show or on a different show I was listening to, but he said, I believe in all the atonement theories.
Yeah,
like
good,
they all
good.
have their place in understanding the cosmos.
Good.
And I think as Christians, we do hang on to penal substitutionary atonement. I think a little bit more from the guilt-driven part of us, but not understanding the cosmic story of there is an enemy, there is reclaiming his people, there is this
victory of Christ,
going down into death, breaking open the doors of hell, and rescuing people too. So there's all these interesting. I think we talked to Kirk Cameron a little about that for a second at the end. Yeah. He was like, "Oh, I never heard about this," and I was like, well, I mean, this for me
That's what this podcast is for, right?
When I was walking away, kind of like disenfranchised by the modern, just evangelical church combos, I was running into some of these old dudes talking about these things going, I feel like the story's bigger. Yeah. I feel like it's crazier. I feel like it's harder to understand. Yeah. And so there's a ransom theory, a couple of those other ones. So there's...
Ransom's theory is somewhat connected to Christus Victor because it's making the devil as kind of the object of it.
Exactly.
So you do see ransom language, in the church fathers. I don't think it's not the best way to think about the atonement, but victory certainly is.
Sure.
And victory is a huge thing for Constantine. So a lot of the talk about the ancient church tends to stick into the 2nd and 3rd century, where it's like they, sort of close to the apostles. Yeah. And then Constantine is often cast as like, oh, he's the bad guy that ruined everything. But actually Constantine, first of all, I think his conversion was legit. I take that view. There's debate about that.
Yeah, there is, yeah.
But that it was a real conversion to what he would understand. It took him some time to grow into it. But there's a whole cosmic battle thing happening with Constantine as well in the ancient church. And so most of the big wig church fathers are after Constantine, like Augustine or the Cappadocians. Athanasius is right there in the middle of it. So John Chrysostom, a lot of the leading lights are living in this new Constantinian world. The Creed of Nicaea, the Nicene Creed.
Well, we were talking, offline, and you said that some of the ancient church fathers, the monastic church fathers, were very, very blurry, as you put it.
Yeah.
Like, talk about that. I mean, the desert fathers went out to the desert. The monks.
Yeah.
I mean, they were making beer, that's for sure. If anyone's ever had Pliny the Elder, it's a very good beer.
The brewing of fine ales.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, I think of that.
There's a Pliny the Elder beer, right? And the younger, they have these. They're actually
like
very hard to get. That's the name of the beer.
Interesting.
They're very hard to get, and they're actually phenomenal.
Egypt was a beer drinking culture because you had grain there.
Yeah.
Israel didn't have enough grain to be very beer. Mesopotamia was beer drinking. Wine was the drink usually in Israel. But I don't think St. Anthony probably wasn't swilling too much beer out there in the desert. But Anthony's interesting. So they're talking about the monks and kind of being these like blurry figures. They were like the OG blurry people, because they lived in that liminal world, like you said, like the desert, like they were called hermits, right? Hermits. Yeah. So there's two kinds of monasticism. There's eremitic and cenobitic. You've heard of this? Eremitic is hermits, single figures living by themselves alone. Cenobitic, koine and bios, it means common life. So it's communal. So that's like Benedict's rule.
Like a monastery.
A monastery where the brothers would come and live together. But the original form was like St. Anthony, eremitic. But that's the word for the desert. So like Jesus says, like, oh, the demon will go out into the arid places and they'll live there and he'll go back. That's where you can go find a bunch more demons and bring them back to civilization.
Also, they send the scapegoat. Azazel is sent to the desert. Christ
that's right.
is tempted in the desert.
Exactly. The desert is the place of
the dry places.
Or like the Gerasene demoniac, he's living in ruins.
Yeah.
Because there's no water of life there. And there's no civilization. So the formless and void is still there. There's still chaos out there. There's still emptiness out there. The world is still vain there. It's like the
primordial.
Primordial world. It hasn't yet been subdued and made productive. So demons love it because
the monks go there.
So the monks go there to do war.
Wow.
They don't go there to escape civilization. They go there to do war where the demons are. They enter the domain of the demons. And like Anthony would
like Obi-Wan Kenobi, just going out.
But these are like the desert fathers. They're going out to
I don't know, man. I feel like Obi-Wan was kind of like shirking his duties a little bit. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like just kind of chilling
Well, I
until
feel
Luke
like
would come along.
they came up with that character based off a monk. He kind of
Or like a samurai.
Yeah.
I think Lucas originally wanted this like samurai guy to do it.
Not a
And then they got.
Not like a warrior monk, like Nacho
Yeah.
Libre.
Yeah, warrior monk. Yeah.
But these monks
My
were,
favorite.
and Anthony,
My favorite monk.
they say, would come back. Whenever he would come back, he would be like bruised and damaged, which is like what Tucker Carlson said
When he
about
has
himself,
demonic
you know?
Yeah,
attack.
so I remember reading. My buddy went to Mount Athos, and he was telling
yeah,
me. He was
Mount
telling me
Athos.
about the hermits are on the coast, and then the other guys are like, but they take these trips to make sure the hermits are all right. You doing okay out here? And they're just all by themselves.
So I did one of those trips one time, and I have to admit, I was sorely disappointed. So our students at Moody one time, we lived on a ship and we sailed in the Aegean Sea. And we put in at different historic ports, and we did life together. We lived on this small ship. It was a sailing yacht. And we put in and hiked up a hill to meet one of these hermits. And I thought, oh, for sure, this guy is going to be so wise. And we're going to just
Gandalf,
like, he's going to be like a Gandalf, or he's going to like understand all these things and explain. He was the most rude and works salvationist guy I've ever met.
Wow.
Like he was mocking our female student. You sleazy, and he's like, you're just getting pleasures now, but I'm going to go to heaven
man.
better. So I was so disappointed. But some
You
of them
probably
were
get
good.
both and you probably get some that are like have become wise and have like sort of, I don't know.
He kind of went crazy, I think.
And then I think you have the
solitude can
others.
make you go crazy a little bit.
Sure. I don't think that humans are designed for that.
But the point is that they are going into this context as kind of these warriors, and they were understood as such. So another, just to kind of connect this to like the scholarly world, but like Peter Brown. So Peter Brown was a Princeton University professor. I think it's Princeton, University of California. Anyway, brilliant guys, published through those presses. But Peter Brown wrote on the rise of the holy man in late antiquity. He also wrote the best biography of Augustine. Like, I love his biography of Augustine. But he also wrote about the rise of the holy man in late antiquity. And what he says is that there's this traditional view of like the ancient and the medieval is like, oh, there's the fall of Rome, and like overnight they kind of fall and the legions disappear and everybody wakes up and is like, oh, Middle Ages. Okay, let's put on my suit of armor and find a princess. Like, I'm medieval now. Like very sudden. And what Brown said is, look, there's this whole phase called late antiquity, where it's still like got this like Roman thing happening, but there's also like this Germanic European thing happening, and they're sort of mixing. But one of the markers of late antiquity is the rise of this figure of the holy man, who is this go-between figure. And most of the Christians knew they could not do what the holy man or woman, because there's these female ascetics. Many of them are female, so it's holy man or holy woman. And we couldn't go do it, but we are so glad that these monks exist, because they are like our Navy SEALs.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be what it would be like today. It's like, I know perfectly well I cannot be a Navy SEAL, but I am so glad that there's somebody who is special forces who can go do that, find the giant in Afghanistan or whatever, like go just fight battles that I know I can't fight. And the monks were like the Navy SEALs for the people, for the common people. They went into the they went into the foreign territory, they defeated the powers on behalf of us all. Wow. And we always think of monks as like, what good were they? Like, that's the evangelical thing. It's like monks were sort of, they rejected evangelism. No, they kind of like did the ultimate evangelism, because they cleared away the demonic powers. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we kind of think of them as like the Amish. They kind of like the Amish. They just went and they did their own thing on their own, right? They siloed themselves, and I guess you could even say it's kind of self-serving. Like they just they wanted to do it for themselves. Right. But
there's
this view
salt.
is
there's a salt, and they preserve society. But those guys were doing spiritual warfare on the front lines.
And there's blurry stories associated with them, like weird things that happen.
Oh yeah, that's pretty much all their stories are like that.
Yeah.
I mean, like how these like, if you look in the artistic tradition of like St. Anthony, it's always like, here he is, and there's like these these wild looking creatures, like in the paintings of the Reformation. There's all these like crazy, 3-headed monsters.
Attacking
and
him, right?
They're all attacking him, pulling his hair, and lascivious hags are like presenting their body to him. And, he's just sexual and yeah, I mean, look at the art of St. Anthony. You'll see it.
I think our listeners have been wondering, Luke, since the beginning. I'm waiting for us to ask you, is there a Holy Grail? Is there?
Is this just your question?
Is Holy Grail a big part of the Blurry verse?
No, I just think growing up,
it's a part of Indiana Jones.
Yeah, well, totally. Like, I was raised on those stories too. Star Wars, Indiana Jones.
I mean, is the cup of Jesus out there somewhere that he drank in the Last Supper? Is it?
Yeah,
Think it is?
I don't think I would say that it is.
Because I feel like these items were probably sought after for a while.
There's at least a couple places that think they have it.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, which is interesting.
But there's places that say they have a vial of the breast milk of Mary.
Yeah, I mean,
do they?
Bizarro.
No. So I don't put...
It's a little far. Some guy at the gym,
I think, Brian, for I think the last that makes sense to me, like to kind of close out this question, this conversation on the early church fathers and, the martyrdom of the apostles and all that is like, for someone who's studied this, teaches this, as a PhD in this space, like, what do you think the ancients knew that we've forgotten? Like, what do these church fathers know that we've forgotten or lost? Because we try to regain a lot of that, right? I mean, this whole conversation really is in a lot about our show is recovering this supernatural worldview. It's re-enchanting the Bible, right? And as we said in the beginning, the church fathers didn't need a re-enchantment. They lived in this space where everything was, there was no separation.
They were closer to it.
So that's one of the things, and I think our conversation today has probably brought that out.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I would say is that the Hebrews and Israelites and the Jews, they understood this. Intertestamental Judaism understood it. New Testament Christians understood it. The church fathers also understood it, and even up into the Middle Ages. So that is part of it. Another thing I would say, and I think this will be a good thing to say for your podcast, which I don't know very well. Like, I'm getting to know you guys, and so I'm kind of becoming part of count me as a member of the Blurry verse.
I'm glad to have you.
Let's go.
Like I'm there, and I'd like to extend it into the patristics. But one of the things I will say that I think the church fathers would have said, someone like Irenaeus, someone like Tertullian, who I wrote my PhD dissertation on Tertullian, is that they would warn against Gnosticism, and in particular, where you take the Christian narrative, but you also bring in so much of the secret, the recondite, the esoteric, that it becomes like elite knowledge, that you use strange and foreign texts to interpret the scripture, and you build up narratives of what happens among the demonic powers. You have to remember they first and foremost are deceivers. Yeah. So the Book of Enoch is not inspired. Right. And so these Second Temple Judaism texts are not inspired. The church fathers are not inspired. So the demons know how to cast a kind of story. They always do. Every civilization has a mythology. Oh, Zeus did this. Oh, we tell the stories of the gods. Aliens, look at aliens, what aliens do, and this is how they came from this planet, and they gave us this technology. The more you live in that blurry verse and you kind of are engaged with it, you run the risk of becoming a modern day Gnostic, where the average Christian just doesn't get it. They're not sort of enlightened. But we who have access to recondite texts are able to sort of reinterpret the narrative of Scripture. And I'm for giving a clear biblical, canonical emphasis on demonic powers. Like, that's important. But be cautious that you don't unwittingly create a kind of fascination with Gnosticism. Because again, you say, who would have believed that? Like, who would believe in salvation by gnosis? But gnosis is very attractive. The sound of the Gnostic is the sound, psst, psst, like, hey, over here. Yeah. Here in this podcast, here in this subset, we'll enlighten you to what's really going on with the angelic powers. Yeah. And I just want you guys, or myself, or any kind of Christian, to be very cautious about a kind of modern Gnosticism where these deceptive powers are able to use well-meaning Christians to sort of give stories that are not actually true. The true biblical story certainly does involve cosmic combat, Yahweh is warrior, all of that, Christus Victor. But the true biblical story is encapsulated in, this is what I wrote my PhD on, in the rule of faith, which is what we would call like the Apostles' Creed. Like the
Yeah.
Bible, and this is what Irenaeus said, this is what Tertullian said, stay away from the Gnostics. They do not offer you the actual story. The true story is what you, if you said the Apostles' Creed, I believe in God the Father Almighty and Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, and just kind of like that central storyline is the biblical storyline. And there's nothing about angels in there. I mean, you have the descent into hell, which is the closest to it. That's a whole topic we could talk about. So I think to answer your question, Luke, what would the church fathers say? They would warn us about the attraction of secret knowledge blending into the biblical story. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. I mean,
we talk about that a lot.
Do you?
I think
that's a lot of the New Age. I mean, that's literally like we get secrets here. We've got stuff that like.
But what I'm saying is, it's like easy to come into Christianity too.
I think
like when you call it New Age, you think, oh, it's obviously not us.
That's the overt part.
But when you do it, it can hide.
I think it creeped into the church in the middle a lot, because a lot of people say, when you were talking earlier in the podcast about the physical blend, I mean, the Gnostic version is it's all spirits and it's all this. It's not actually physical. Like the angels weren't physical creatures. So I think we're trying to get out of that and go back to like, you can trust Genesis 6. You can trust the cross. You can trust the tree because the physical universe that God indwelled in is not a Gnostic idea.
Right.
And I think that we got into some of this weird Gnostic explanations for these ancient stories that we read somewhere where we didn't understand them, and kind of gave them a spiritual explanation. But people say, oh, it's supernatural, it's spiritual. That's a Gnostic thing to say.
Yeah.
That's not actually how I think an ancient Christian would say it.
Yeah,
like it's all a part of it, So anyway,
they understood the materiality of the world, which is why relics and Eucharist and all of these things were so important to them.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating because it's like, because that is now weird to a lot of evangelicals, right?
Right. But that was the original belief.
Yeah.
But we definitely do find ourselves like wandering that line, but I think that's why we come back to.
No, I know you guys are solid. Yeah.
I wouldn't say that.
Well, thanks, Bryan. That's great. I appreciate that.
Some days we have too many salads and it's not so solid.
What else, though? Anything else that you think that they would say that we've forgotten? The church fathers would say we've forgotten here in 2026.
You might have to die.
Yeah.
That's probably the martyr consciousness was part of their, and after Constantine comes, that it sort of flips to dying to self.
Sure.
So you get the baptism of blood, the baptism of tears.
Right.
So the martyrs, they die. But
that's a reality, though. I mean, if you're in Nigeria right now as a Christian, if you're in, Libya, if you're in some of these places, that's actually a reality.
And I would even say it's here insofar as you say, are they going to kill us? No. Do we have to die to self? Not just sort of mortify the flesh, but like maybe I need to die to like the American dream, because the cost of being a Christian in some near point in the future is going to cost this or that from me.
Yeah.
And so like Nigeria, bloodshed, maybe not bloodshed. I won't go so far as to say that America is going to start that. But like a lot of people have paid serious prices in recent times in the West, in the UK, in Canada, maybe in America, that if you stand for Christ or Christian types of things that are associated with the Christian worldview, you will pay a price. Yeah. And the early Christians would be like, yeah, that's actually the norm. You forget that the Messiah was crucified, that glory is on the other side of that. And so the wise ancient Christian would probably try to unravel our blending of the American dream with Christianity.
Yeah, that's really the impetus, or sort of that ground is which the prosperity gospel came out of, right? Is that God wants you to have all this material stuff, and you just don't believe enough because you don't have enough because you don't believe enough, right? Yeah. And I think the ancient fathers would be like, what? Yeah. Like the ancient Christians would be like, our expectation is that we die as Christ died physically because of what we believe.
It very well could be that.
I think that's a hard paradigm for a lot. As we sit here, it's hard to be like.
Right. I don't even like saying that because I know I have to apply it to myself.
Right. Sure.
And what can I just loftily throw out there into the Blurry verse that the Lord will say, okay, my son, let's see if what you just said is going to be part of, like, let's see if you can back it up.
Yeah.
In the near future.
Love that.
Yeah.
It's
and the ancient Christians would say, be be appropriately fearful. Like have daring to wrestle with these powers. Like be cautious. Like you can't just be arrogant. Christ is the victor, but that doesn't mean these powers aren't very strong. Be afraid of them in a certain sense. Like recognize that they loom over you all the time. Like when you go around and you tour in Rome or something, you're like, oh, look at this statue, these sort of beautiful carvings those were real powers.
Yeah.
Those were idols. They localized, again, idols localized the presence of God. I mean, that's part of our conversation, is that to be an image bearer is to localize God's presence in a visible way. Image, you see it, right? And so they would tell us to be very aware that the powers loom over and they are deadly and destructive. Their appetites are exorbitant. They want to eat, they want to consume, they want to eat flesh and blood. That's an interesting thing, isn't it? I know we're at the end here, but flesh and blood, like those, like they're cannibals, right?
Yeah.
In the Book of Enoch, like they eat flesh and blood.
Well, in Genesis too, that they consumed everything.
Yeah,
right?
they're consumers, right? And the ultimate essence of Christianity is the giving of divine flesh and blood.
That's right.
Not even in the temple where you say the grace is to give the substitute. Like that was how the grace was given at first. Oh, Isaac doesn't have to be sacrificed on Mount Moriah, which is where the temple is, because the substitute is the ram. Or the temple can be built on that exact same spot where the substitute, that you don't have to be this, there's a scapegoat, there's a substitute. So the mercy is there. But in Christ, the mercy becomes not just sort of that paradigm, but merciful and substitutionary. In Christ, the paradigm becomes the giving. Now I give to you. Instead of me consuming your flesh and blood, I, without you doing anything, grant you divine flesh and blood. So it's like reverse cannibalism in that sort of sense, which is, again, John 6 is very, very stark. Unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you can have no part of me. And everybody's like, that's weird. You don't really mean, yes, I do.
That's weird.
Yes, I really do mean you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And he loses a bunch of disciples in that passage.
Yeah.
But the point stands, is that the Christ paradigm is instead of consuming the means and the good and the flesh and the productivity of human life, all of that is being granted to you as free gift. It's amazing.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of humility required.
Yeah.
Whether you're walking into an old church, or you're saying a prayer over somebody, or you're reading the ancient stories.
Yeah.
I think it's easy to kind of get an ego at somewhere along the way.
Yeah.
And it really changes everything.
Yeah.
Kind of keeps you from that relationship, which is,
it's a good word.
It's a long story, and it's a hard one. You have to kind of sometimes get a 50,000 foot view of it to really see. And I think that's what Heiser did for a lot of people, is he kind of made sense of these parts that weren't connected.
Right.
So we kind of understood this chunk and we understand that chunk, but there's no way to read the Bible linearly and understand it.
Yeah.
But he helped a lot of people understand, like, oh, this is how I can inquire some, add some things in Deuteronomy that I don't understand. And because you're reading blurry things through. I was reading Deuteronomy the other day, and it's like the clothes didn't wear out when they're out there wandering. They have supernatural clothes on. They just don't break down.
Yeah.
They didn't have to go to Miller's.
It's that early Carhartt.
Miller's Outpost.
Yeah,
And we always thought like Daniel and the lions did. Like, you see it in Sunday school. Right? It's just a cute Sunday school picture. Then you look at Daniel now, you look at Daniel 10, where these powers, the princes of these nations.
Persia,
and suddenly it's like, I think what Heiser did, for me or for many people, is he like foregrounded what was kind of backgrounded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't deny that, and he said, hey, this is actually foreground.
Yeah, and here's the context, and this is why it makes sense. Yeah. It's like the old meme, like that the angel just showed up with a laser pointer in the lion's den, and just that's how Daniel stayed safe all night.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure you think that was it was Christ, right? I mean, you take that in there as Jesus. Yeah.
But I think if an ancient father could come today and talk about some of these things, a lot of people would go, "Oh, okay, I get it," because they're closer to it.
Yeah.
So I think understanding their worldview just goes, okay, that's why, for us, that's why Grandpa did that, and so many generations go by and we just kind of don't understand it. Yeah. It's like, oh, you guys are weird.
That's why I like studying the ancient church. I think this is kind of what got me into it. I went to seminary at Dallas, and I thought, well, now once I learn Greek and Hebrew, then I'll have the key that I'll know how to interpret what the Bible says.
Yeah.
But learning the languages just gave me more possibility of many different interpretations.
Yeah.
Because I had more skill to sort of use different languages to come up with other things, not to mention the manuscripts. So then I realized there has to be some kind of like wisdom context around Scripture. And I found that in the early church. They're not, sola scriptura, right? Like
Yes.
tradition, Scripture is above tradition, of course, but tradition is wise. And the church fathers lived in the same Greco-Roman world, So I got into them because they were still inhabiting the world that the apostles had
The same
lived in.
culture,
same culture, still the Roman Empire. I mean, the medieval, okay, now you're living in something different. But the church fathers, like you're saying, they lived in the same awareness of the unseen realm.
Well, Bryan, it's been awesome, man.
Truly the bone zone.
I loved it, dude. I mean, this is like, if it's history and it's scripture and archaeology and kind of uncovering these very cool ancient truths, I'm all for it. So I love this. Of course, we've got 2 books here on set that you've written with our friend Kathy Lee Gifford.
She's great.
Nero and Paul, Herod and Mary, but you've also written on your own.
Yeah.
After Acts.
After Acts, published with Moody Publishers. Early Christian Martyr Stories, which is a Baker book, Getting to Know the Church Fathers. That's probably been my most popular book, Getting to Know the Church Fathers.
Well, I think we'd love to have you back and do just one on the martyrs and kind of run through that.
I would love that.
There was too much today to get to, but this was...
We need to do the martyrs because
awesome.
you need to meet, your listenership needs to meet Perpetua and Polycarp and all of these.
We'll have to get you back out here.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
But Bryan,
Thank you
thanks
for
so
having me.
much.
It's truly an honor.
Tell everybody where they can find your books. I'm sure anywhere books are sold, but I'm not sure if you have a website or a place that you collect your work.
My name is a website, so if someone wants, hey, who's this guy?
Right.
Bryan with a Y, and then Litfin, so just bryanlitfin.com. So you can find out about me there. But I mean, I like to put these out there because Kathy is such a rock star and popular person.
Yeah.
So if you want to just get into the life of Mary and the life of Paul and like a villain and a divine instrument being juxtaposed, like the way that God works through the lowly, even when the mighty and the powerful like Herod or Nero are dominating. The real divine way is the way of love, the way of Christ, which is the way of Paul and the way of Mary. So these books, your listenership would probably like that.
It's been awesome, dude.
Thank you.
Love it.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Bryan.